the church this weekend, we remember the 1-year anniversary of the Tree of Life tragedy here in our city that has touched so many lives. And it's fitting that we gather in prayer this Sunday and show our solidarity and union with all believers and pray for those who have been marred by hatred. 40 years ago, this October 7th, 1979, for the first time in 455 years, a non-Italian pope was elected. 2 years ago, he became a saint, Pope St. John Paul II. The third longest reigning pope in the history of the papacy. 27 years. This is what he said at the opening address when he became the successor of St. Peter. I quote him directly. For me, prayer is the first priority of life. Prayer is the most basic prerequisite to service of the church and the world. Every believer should always think of prayer as an essential and indispensable component of one's vocation. It is the opus divinium, which means God's work, which preceded and overshadows over every work. We know well that faithfulness to prayer, or its neglect, is a test of the vitality of religious life, the apostolate, and of our Christian fidelity. Do you believe that? What's Pope John Paul II saying? Prayer is more essential than the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe. If we're not faithful to prayer, it's the greatest barometer of how our life is going or not going. Biblically, that resounds throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. We have glowing examples today. From Ben Sirach, 180 BC, it's instruction, 51 chapters of great distilled wisdom, maxim, quotes, if you will, that God listens to the prayer of every sinner. He shows no preference, no partiality, no favorites. He has special affinity and affection for, the umbrella term is the Anawim. The Anawim are the vulnerable, the marginalized, those on the peripheries. The last, the lowest, the powerless, the orphan, the stranger, the widow, the oppressed, all the nobodies. Sirach says, the prayer of the lowly person pierces the clouds and does not rest until it reaches its goal, nor will it withdraw till the Most High responds. Last night I prayed with 3 people who died. A 63-year-old, a 77-year-old, and a 90-year-old. And there's something revealing in the vulnerability of death to invoke prayer. I can't explain it to you. You have to experience it. The humble prayer pierces the clouds. The Lord is close to those whose hearts are shattered and brokenhearted. Prayer makes us humble. It makes us know that we're not God and we need God. No matter how old we get, no matter what our social status in societies, no matter how many accomplishments or degrees or titles or positions or whatever we want to put on. Don't masquerade. Don't kid yourself. You've got to be a beggar of prayer each time. The Lord hears the cry of the poor, the oppressed, meaning to acknowledge our utter dependency on God's grace every day to be faithful to our vocation as Christians, as believers, as disciples. Yesterday I was listening to the show talk of Mike Sullivan, a great hero of mine. He happens to be the coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins. I followed him through the years. We were getting some players back yesterday. He said, when Brian Rust is in our Penguin lineup, we're a better team. And I thought to myself, because we're in church, we're a better church. Because we're part of the family, we're a better family. Because we're part of this company, we're a better company. Because we're part of this organization, we're a better organization. And because we enter the world, it's a better world. That's what prayer tells us. Paul is offering a prayer to young Timothy. It's his calling. He's ready to pass on the baton. He's in a prison cell in Rome. He's about to be martyred for the faith. And Paul identifies his sufferings with those of Christ. And he says, my lifeblood has been poured out for the gospel, for the sake of Christ. So my mom and dad, they reminded their 7 children, every ounce of blood in their being was for us, lest we ever forget. It was a poured out libation. A libation was a ritual pouring of a little liquid drinking that was offered to a god or to a spirit or to the memory of a dead person. Well, Paul says, my entire life has been poured out in love, in commitment, in sacrifice for something greater, the kingdom of God. And as Paul's coming to the end of his mission and his ministry on earth, he says, my life's been poured out. Paul had countless trials and scourges and sufferings and obstacles and difficulties and disillusionment like we all have. That's the landscape of life. Life breaks us all. I've discovered in my years as hospital chaplain, oftentimes, the last years of people's lives are the hardest and most difficult. Recently, this week, I was with a man who's 66 years of age. He's been suffering with bladder cancer for the last 7 years. And he told me, he said, Father, I'm not the smartest person in the world. I haven't accomplished anything great in my life. But God blessed me with faith. I've always gone to church. I've always prayed. He's blessed me with common sense. He's blessed me with a beautiful wife of 35 years and 2 children, 5 grandchildren. And he said, but I'm tired. I'm tired. And he said, I've never asked anybody this before, Father, but will you pray that I have an easy and calm death? Because I'm ready. I said a prayer with him on Friday before I left the dead. Last Sunday, he passed away. And I thought to myself, his race is over. His crown is an eternal crown with the Lord in heaven, that his mission is fulfilled. And I would rejoice that this Sunday, he's praying for me here today at Holy Family Chapel, and for every one of you this morning. Jesus describes 2 men going to a temple in Jerusalem. They're as different as day and night. The Pharisee and a tax collector. The Pharisee was a very important person in ancient Jerusalem. They were much esteemed. They were professional scholars. They were religious, highly respected, the elite of a political society, and everyone looked up to them. The Pharisee believed that they deserved God's love and admiration of others. No one loved the Pharisee more than the Pharisee. Isn't that true for many of us? His prayer was one of self-congratulation speech, self-adulation, if you will. He begins to boast and tout of all of his spiritual piety accomplishments. And then he begins to be the poster boy of self-righteousness. He totally lacks any sense of sin. He's so self-focused. He gives an unmistakably elitist edge to life. I'm not like the other schmucks out there, the nobodies of humanity, especially that tax agent. And then he says in a disclaimer, I'm not greedy, I'm not crooked, I'm not adulterous. But he's filled with this anger, frustration in life, pride, conceit, arrogance, uncharitableness, boastfulness. It happens to us all, right? After all, the Pharisee says, like any good Jew, I go and pray in the temple 3 times a day. 9 a.m., 12 noon, 3 p.m. I fast twice a week. I pay tithes on all my possessions. Well, the tax collector, the nobodies, the spies that people always go to, we know what it's like paying a tax collector, huh? He has his head bowed, he's beating his breast, he's pleading with God for mercy, and he offers a simple prayer in the temple that has come to known through the centuries as the Jesus prayer. Oh God, have mercy on me, a wretched and miserable sinner. He has contrition. He has sorrow for his mistakes in life. He has acknowledgement that he's not all that he could be, that he hasn't reached the heights of his potential. Well, the Pharisee, he goes to the temple and he goes home the same way. He's still proud, he's still arrogant, he's still boastful. Nothing changed. The tax collector goes home from the temple in Jerusalem, and there's a difference. He's a new man. He's justified with God. He's at right peace. He has an integrated life. He's stitched together well. What does the parable tell us? If you really depend on God, you're like a beggar. You're not proud. You don't despise any human being because we're all wretched, weak sinners. Never think for a moment, Jesus tells us, that you're better than anyone. We're all on equal footing. We're all the same clay in the same mud pad. The central message is not to think less of anyone for any reason. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. We all have virtues. We all have vices. We all have sins. We all have graces. We all have a redeemed part of our humanity, and we all have an unredeemed part of our humanity. We all have holy desires, and we all have unholy desires. And to not acknowledge that is to be naive. But learning to accept others is the most important step in learning to accept ourselves. If you can't accept others, then you haven't accepted all the facets of you. I'm reading a marvelous book right now, Can Francis Change the Church? How American Catholics Are Responding to His Leadership, by Father Thomas Sweetser. He's a Jesuit priest. For 46 years, he studied parishes across this entire nation. He's interviewed 55 people. People who have stayed in the Catholic Church, people who have left the Catholic Church. People who have stayed in religious life, people who have left religious life. People who have stayed in their marriages, people who have exited their marriages. Pope Francis, when there were 6,000 journalists before him in the professional media, and they were waiting for the first word that he was going to speak to define and describe himself, he began by saying, I'm a sinner. Not what they expected. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Not only was he saying he was a sinner, he was saying we are all sinners. We're a great army of sinning, suffering, sorrowing humanity. And that's why every talk he begs us to pray for him. So that we'll kneel before the throne of God and ask mercy for him and the whole world. True prayer comes from faith, to grow in love of God and love of neighbor. It's the work of a lifetime. May we never be tempted to compare ourselves with others or compete with others. If we compare with anyone, may we compare with Christ and the saints as we celebrate All Saints' Day this Friday. As we come to the Eucharist today, let us not pat ourselves on the back. Let us not be sure that God's records are up to date. Rather, we come to the Eucharist to pray, to expand in love, to live more honestly and humbly, to resist the temptation that some individual or some group, that I'm better than that. Let the tax collector's prayer become our own this week. O God, be merciful to me, a sinner. With humility, piety, and faith and devotion, we're reminded that the Lord upholds our life. The goal of our life is to be holy. And the goal to be holy is to go to heaven. There's nothing more important that I've ever learned in life than a daily appointment with Jesus in prayer. Jesus is waiting for us. It makes a difference in a day. And it makes a difference